Hey guys! Welcome back to our channel. Today we're going to be doing American Horror Story series part 2. So if you know us and if you've seen part 1 of American Horror Story, then you know how much we love this show. Obsessed. We are obsessed. And if there's a scene or a story from a season that you guys want to see, please feel free to comment down below and we'll talk about it because we love doing it. So like Matthew said, today we're going to be talking about Season 2 Asylum, which is honestly one of my favorite seasons.
Yeah.
It terrified me watching. It was so scary.
So good. Definitely
one of the best, I feel, for sure.
Definitely. So yeah, let's get into it. Alright, so today we're going to be talking about the real life person who inspired Bloody Faith and what inspired Briarcliff, the mental institution. So yeah, let's get into it. We're going to start with Briarcliff Manor.
So in Season 2, we are introduced to Briarcliff Manor, which is a terrifying mental institution with some pretty scary people running the place. And throughout the season, we see a lot of physical abuse, terrible living conditions, intense method of what they call therapy, and even human experiments. And if you're familiar with American Horror Story, then you know there are so many different characters, there's so many different side stories that happen throughout the season, which eventually kind of connect and come together at some point. And many of these stories are inspired by true events and true people. And Briarcliff happens to be inspired by Willowbrook State School.
So if you don't know about Willowbrook State School, the history behind it, when World War II ended, they didn't know what to do with this large Staten Island facility. It was on 375 acres of land. So then the New York governor Thomas Dewey, he argued that there were thousands of children in the state who were, and this is his direct quote, mentally and physically defective and feeble-minded who never can be members of society. So he was a pretty disgusting person. But because of that, he encouraged the Willowbrook State School to open on October 1947, and they admitted 20 mentally disabled patients. This was a school where parents sent their children who they thought were mentally disabled.
And back then, like, parents, not all parents, but I will say some, they had no intention of ever getting their kids back.
Yeah.
Like, they would leave their kid if they had any type of mental disability, because back then it was considered like a stain on the family name. So it was easier for them to just drop their kids off here, leave them, and continue on with their life, which is absolutely, it's so sad.
So sad. I can't imagine like what those kids went through.
Yeah.
So by 1955, the school had reached its full capacity of 4,000 patients, and it was overfilled and understaffed. And then by 1969, it reached its peak with 6,200 patients, becoming the largest mental institution in the United States. The first people ever heard about Willowbrook was from Robert Kennedy's speech, where he said, "I visited the state institutions for the mentally disabled, and I think particularly at Willowbrook, we have a situation that borders on a snake pit." And then a couple years later, 2 journalists snuck into the facility. Their names were Gein and Geraldo Rivera, by getting a key from an employee who was about to be fired, and they showed like what was really going on at this school to the public. So some of the pictures that they took were pictures of mentally disabled patients huddled and wandering aimlessly. The patients were not allowed outside. Older patients would just sleep in chairs. They didn't have beds. Many were crouched, rocking back and forth on the floor. Some child patients didn't have any clothes on.
It's terrible.
It's so sad. The conditions that these people lived in were absolutely horrible. And then 60% of the patients were not toilet trained, and 64% were incapable of feeding themselves. And because these people were neglected, they were not cleaned, they were covered in their own feces, their own urine, which obviously caused a stench, and the journalist said it resembled disease and death. So it was just absolutely horrible, the conditions these people lived in. I can't even imagine. And then they were able to interview one of the patients, and this was a quote from him. He said he got beaten with sticks, belt buckles, and kicked into the wall by staff. He also said many of the kids sat around naked with no clothes on, and there was a lot of sexual abuse from staff to residents. So sad. And then another student who worked there for the summer witnessed the same things. And it should be noted that they just hired people to have staff. Like, they didn't hire medically trained people at all. Like, they wanted to...
They weren't worried about who was coming in the building, more as we need help with all of these patients. Obviously, if it's overrun, but that's just
horrible.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like, they would just hire people because they needed hands, pretty much. Yeah, those were the conditions these people lived in, and that's honestly not even the worst part. The worst part comes in 1955 when Dr. Saul Krugman, he began using patients as human experiments for the treatment of hepatitis. So he would infect the patients with the disease by using the stool of infected patients and putting it into the food of the other patients. Just horrible. And he would justify this. Like, he would say that 90% of the patients already had it, so it was impossible for other patients not to get it, so he just gave it to them. And that's kind of how in his mind he would like...
And nothing ever happened to this guy, right?
Nope. He got awards for like finding cures and treatments, and nothing ever happened to him, which makes me so mad. But it was mostly children that he would do this to, and he would get consent from parents by telling them that they were vaccinations, when in reality he was just infecting them. So he would do that and perform experiments on them and to figure out like a cure or a treatment, and it's just absolutely disgusting. So after the journalists put out the pictures of the conditions of what was happening, a lot of the parents of the residents there filed a lawsuit on March 17th, 1972, saying that the conditions violated constitutional rights. The judge on the case did not find that the conditions in Willowbrook violated any constitutional rights, but that's insane to me. Like, I can't see how he could see these pictures and see what was going on.
It doesn't make any sense.
No, and actually say that. But eventually they did end up reducing the number of residents living at Willowbrook. They wanted to reduce it to no more than 250 by 1981, but they didn't think that this was feasible. So they ended up fully closing in 1987.
That's insane that they were able to stay open that long, though.
That's when, like, 1987.
With all of that came out.
Is crazy.
That's insane. So now we're going to get into the second story from Season 2, Asylum. Also, just want to give a spoiler alert now before we go any further. If you haven't seen it and are still wanting to see it, just skip on, okay?
Yeah.
Just skip on for a little bit because there's a spoiler alert.
Yes, a big one.
So, in Season 2, we are also introduced to Dr. Oliver Thredson, who is a court-appointed psychiatrist and therapist to the supposed, big word there, supposed captured murderer Bloodyface, who was known and wanted for murdering multiple women. But as the season continues, we learn more about Dr. Thredson's dark past as well as who he really is. So about halfway through the season, we see where Dr. Thredson lives and how he lives. And again, just a warning, this is pretty gruesome stuff, but his home essentially was decorated with human body parts and skin. And there's a human skull that was being used as a bowl. There was a lampshade made from human skin, and we see an entire room with medical instruments and bones.
How disgusting.
So creepy. And so the plot twist is that good old Oliver Thredson is actually the wanted bloody-faced murderer.
Dun, 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 dun.
And interesting enough, Bloodyface is actually based on the true story of the notorious grave robber and killer Ed Gein. So a little bit about Ed Gein's background. He was born on August 27th, 1906 in La Crosse, Wisconsin. And for many, as we know about many serial killers, they come from a very disruptive, dysfunctional, and abusive family. So his father, George, was a chronic alcoholic, and he was never able to hold one job. And he actually died at the age of 66, which is so young, due to heart failure from his alcoholism.
Wow.
His mother, Augusta, was extremely religious and overprotective. She always preached at Ed and his brother Henry about the evils of the world and how every single woman was supposedly inherently promiscuous and lustful, but I guess she wasn't part of that.
Right.
Like,
she was.
Is she also lustful?
And this reminds me of something that we'll mention later.
Mm-hmm. Keep this in mind, guys.
Yes.
So it's obvious that this all had a lasting and impactful impression on Ed growing up. It was said that he had a very odd relationship with his mother, that he pretty much devoted himself to her. He never left home. He lived with them literally until both of his parents died.
Wow.
He never dated anybody. And it's been said that he even acted weird in school, like he would just be seen talking to himself, just odd behavior, really. So, and when his mother died in 1945, Ed became even more kind of crazy and deranged. He left his mother's room untouched. He literally boarded up certain rooms in his house that were frequently used by his mother because he didn't want anybody, or even himself, like going in there and disrupting it, which is so weird.
It's so like eerie.
That's so weird. So around this time, a few people from the area were missing from the town, which is worth noting. But on November 9th, 1957, a woman named Bernice Warden had been reported missing from her hardware store. It was reported that the cash register was missing and that there was trail of blood and blood stains on the floor leading to the back of the store. And witnesses claimed to have seen Ed in the hardware store the night before Bernice's disappearance. So authorities quickly went to Ed's home and they were horrified at what they found. And again, this is just another trigger warning. It's about to get pretty gruesome.
Yeah.
So authorities found Bernice's body gutted and hanging from the ceiling with her head missing.
Oh my gosh.
She had been shot and mutilated after she had died. But this was just the first of the many gruesome discoveries police would find in Ed's home. They found human bones, skin that Ed would use all around his house, including a waste paper basket he made from human skin chair covers, skulls on his bedpost, bowls made from human skulls, a lamp made from human skin. Does this sound familiar yet?
Seriously.
And he also made masks from these skin that he would literally put on. A pair of lips on a window shade drawstring, like to pull down the window, and just other organs found in jars that he was keeping for God only knows what.
I can't imagine walking into that, being the authorities, having to see all that. Like, that's another level.
Yeah, and honestly, while doing some research, there was a police officer who literally went insane. Like during when he was interviewing Ed, he like got so crazy listening to Ed talk that he like slammed Ed's head down on the table, or hit him in some way, and he had to quit.
Wow.
Yeah, because honestly, I don't blame him.
No, this isn't even something that a normal person thinks up. So like to have to walk into that and see that and see what someone did, like that's just
has to affect you for sure.
100%. That's not.
So Ed was finally arrested, and he admitted to the police that he killed Bernice, as well as another local woman who went missing 3 years ago, and her name was Mary Hogan. Ed also admitted to digging up graves at a few different local grave sites, and he would cut and take their body parts to use them around his house. He would target newly buried women specifically, and if this isn't creepy enough, women who resembled his mother.
That's so weird.
No. And it wasn't long after his mother died that Ed became obsessed with making what he called a woman suit, using the skin from the graves he would rob to make it as a way to be closer to her, and he literally wanted to be stepping into her skin.
Oh my gosh. How,
like, what another level.
Yeah, how deranged do you have to be?
Oh my gosh. So authorities tried connecting Ed to other missing person cases around the area, but there was never any damning evidence to link him to them. So who really knows how many people?
I feel like there has to be more.
Yeah.
Especially with like what they had back then, they didn't have a lot to like catch people.
Exactly.
So there has to be more.
Yeah.
Like,
Wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
So in 1968, Ed went to trial and was found guilty of murder, and was also found to be insane. And he was institutionalized and committed to Central State Hospital for the criminally insane. And he died in 1984 of cancer and respiratory illness at the age of 77. And just an interesting fact that we found while researching, after he was buried, his story kind of became like just a weird popular story that people were drawn to in a way. So people would visit his gravesite and they would chip away at his tombstone to take basically like a souvenir.
So weird.
That's so weird. They literally did this until the entire tombstone itself was stolen in in 2000. And it wasn't until 2001 that it was replaced. And today it remains unmarked. So I guess people can't know where he's lying and stay.
I wonder if people did that because he would like rob graves. So
I was thinking that too. Like, is that a way of like getting back?
Like some kind of connection there? I don't know.
That's a good thought.
Yeah. And then, so we always want to mention like the movies and stuff that were inspired by these people. So like with many serial killers, Hollywood has based quite a few movies off of Ed Gein. So if you didn't already see by like how we talked about it, Psycho. Obviously, Norman Bates was based off of Ed Gein.
And the Bates Hotel, too.
And the Bates Hotel, yes. He has a weird relationship and obsession with his dead mother in the movie and in the show. Like we mentioned, Ed Gein's was the same way. He had this weird obsession with his mother, and he would steal the female corpses just so he could, you know, put the body parts together, slip into his mother's skin. Like in the movie, how Norman Bates would wear his mother's clothes and had his mother's corpse.
Honestly, like that's what it goes to show you, that upbringing is such a huge role in how these people become who they are. Because his mom is preaching all of this stuff like, oh, every woman's evil. So if you're growing up with that mentality, of course you're only going to want to cling to your mom. Like, it's just weird.
It's so weird. And then Texas Chainsaw Massacre, made in 1974, is also loosely inspired by Gein. So like both of them collect body parts. Like in the movies, he uses the human skin to make his leather face. And then Silence of the Lambs. Buffalo Bill, just like Gein's, kept his victims' body parts as trophies. So, and there's a couple more. There's a lot of movies and shows and stuff that were inspired off of Ed Gein's. The gruesomeness of it,
so
just the
gross
stuff that he did.
You like, I want to say you can't make this up, but obviously people are creative. But this is just,
I always think like the people who were living in that time, like when they heard this stuff happening, like what, like I would have been so terrified, because you don't hear about stuff like that happening today, because you know there's not a lot of serial killers. People get caught quickly. You know.
Can you imagine finding this out happening in your own town?
Oh my gosh, I would be terrified. Nope. It's so scary. I wouldn't go anywhere.
No.
All right, guys. So that's it for now. We're gonna try to be uploading a video every week, once a week. I said
Wednesdays or Thursdays.
Yes, Wednesdays or Thursdays. So keep an eye out for our next one, and make sure to follow us on TikTok, Instagram. Check out our blog. All linked below. We have
actually way more videos on American Horror Story, particular true stories from American Horror Story, on our TikTok. So please go ahead and check that out and follow us if you haven't already. Subscribe.
Yes, like this video.
Put that bell notification on, right? Okay, you want to see these upcoming vids, and let us know again like what you guys want to see. And if you really love American Horror Story, please let us know what stories from American Horror Story you want to see. For sure. We will do them for you.
All right. That's it for now.
Bye guys.